Pope Francis is praising his late predecessor, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, one day before he will preside over his funeral.
Yeah, he called the late pontiff a, quote, great master
of catechist.
Catechist, that's
yes,
exactly right.
That was an interesting quote from him.
He also went on to say, with acute and gentle thought while holding a general audience in Vatican City today. Just a short distance away, thousands of people continue to honour Pope Benedict. Today marks the third and final day of public viewings at St. Peter's Basilica.
Joining us now from Rome is CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay. Hi there, Chris. Roughly 135,000 people have already paid tribute to the Pope Emeritus as he lies there in state. Tell us what the atmosphere is like in Vatican City during this historic moment in time, also given these other parts of the equation that are so different, the fact that he retired and was the first pope to retire in 600 years.
Right, Lana and Errol. There's actually a lot more anticipation than you might expect. There's anticipation for the funeral that's coming tomorrow and all of the faithful who are lining up behind me. And by the way, these are the last ones who are going to get to see Pope Benedict lying in state, because in just a few minutes they're going to seal off his coffin. Now, there have, as you mentioned, been thousands of people to see him in the last few days. However, they've been steadily in and out, not like the throngs of people who waited in line for days, mind you, some of them hours, but many of them days to see the body of Pope John Paul II lying in state. Now, there's also anticipation for what comes next. Now, even though we already have a pope in Pope Francis, now we no longer have a retired pope. And that was a pope who was also donning white and calling himself a pope, living here in the Vatican. When he resigned, he established a precedent, basically saying it was okay for popes to leave the papacy in another way besides dying. So now that there's no retired pope here at the Vatican, the big question is, does that free up a space for Pope Francis to retire one day? Today, he's 86 years old. That's 1 year older than Pope Benedict was when he retired. And Pope Francis has talked about retiring possibly if he ever reaches a place where he doesn't feel capable of fulfilling his papal duties. In fact, last month he said he's already drafted a resignation letter that he's ready to submit in case his health doesn't allow him to carry out his job.
And I guess that is one of the legacies of Pope Emeritus Benedict's time, that you can line up and do things differently than was done before when it comes to the changing of power, essentially. What other details can you tell us about the service that Pope Francis is overseeing and taking place right now?
Well, the biggest differences from a typical papal funeral is that since he wasn't a reigning pope or a sitting pope, you don't have the heads of state flocking here from around the world. So President Joe Biden will not be here. In fact, the only two official delegations that were invited to the funeral were from Germany, where Pope Benedict was from, and from Italy, where the Vatican is. There will be some other delegations, some heads of states from here and there, but nothing compared to when a sitting pope dies. You even have a number of cardinals who aren't coming, which normally when a pope dies, cardinals from all corners of the world would convene here in Vatican City. For the rest of it, it'll look like a typical papal funeral. You'll have Pope Francis celebrating the Requiem Mass. Inside the coffin of Pope Benedict will be placed some of the commemorative medals and coins that were minted during his papacy. You'll have what's known as the rogito, the deed that will be placed inside of his coffin. That's sort of a history of his papacy. And then he'll be buried in the grottos beneath St. Peter's Basilica in the exact same tomb where his predecessor, John Paul II, was buried before he was beatified and then eventually became a saint and laid to rest near the sculpture of the Pietà sculpted by Michelangelo. But of course, the biggest difference is that another pope is presiding over the funeral. This is only the second time in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church that that's happened.
That really puts it into context, doesn't it?
Yeah, really interesting. Chris Livesay, thank you very much.
Thank you.